Yes, so welcome everyone
Do
to this session.
Do you want us to mute it?
Go ahead if you want to mute it, then it will be useful because when we have discussions later, then you can unmute yourself. Right.
Then there may be less disturbance.
Thank you, Naren, and thank you, Guatching, Chexiu, and Naren for being here this evening. I'd like to welcome you to our discussion for this evening. This is on the narrative conversation, and especially for Guatching and Chexiu, you know that this is based on Michael Hall's book, Coaching Conversations, and this becomes part of our monthly meta coaching series. We also have the Neuro-Semantics series, relationship series, and parenting series. Now, today's session will be the final part of the coaching conversation series. With coaching conversation, I started this, I think, because this is already number 16. So I started this almost 1.5 years ago. Every month I bring one topic from the book, Coaching Conversation. So this will be the final one, because by January, I will start on another series. The coaching series will be going into the meta coaching system. So that's what we'll be doing from January onward. So tonight we'll be wrapping up our discussion on the coaching conversations. Now, in the 60 to 90 minutes together, we'll be discussing on, one will be the theoretical framework behind this narrative conversation. The other will be questions for re-narrating your story, because we create narratives, we create stories. What if the stories that we create are not so nice, are not so healthy? So this is what this narrative conversation is all about. As usual, I will pause for discussion after each main point. This is when I will invite you, if you have any questions, you have any comments, contributions, or if you just want to think out loud, go ahead, because that is when we begin to learn from each other. My style, as usual, is to be light and humorous. If I laugh or smile, I'm never laughing at you, but at our silly human qualities. My purpose is to lighten things up and reduce being serious to be more real. In neurosemantics, we say that if you get serious, you get stupid. So that's part of the strategy to remain sane and well. Now, in this session on narrative conversation, we'll be exploring a few questions. One of the questions that we'll be exploring, so what I'll do is, in order to give you some visual, I'm just sharing my screen right now. Some of the questions that we'll be discussing about this evening. The question of, is it possible to coach a client's narrative? What questions and processes enable us to facilitate a narrative conversation? Why hold a narrative conversation? What is its value and purpose? How is it structured? And these are the questions that we'll be discussing this evening. So let's move on to the theoretical framework, so that we know the background of narrative conversations, and when we understand the theoretical framework behind it, it makes it easier for us to hold this narrative conversation. So the first point here is that to say that we are narrative beings is to recognize the degree to which our minds are full of stories. Hopefully these are good stories, not stories that delude us. And it is from these stories that our goals and motivations, our understandings and decisions, our values and our emotions arise. Narrative, as we are using the term and concept here, provides a key structure or paradigm which we use for thinking about our lives and framing our meanings and actions. From the database of our experience, we draw conclusions about ourselves, others, and life. In this way, we create a frame that make up our inner game and which drives our outer games or prohibit us from playing the game of life. So narratives are important in that sense. Next point is that the narrative conversation refer to working with the narrative that a client has created and coded regarding the events of his or her life. We engage in these conversations about the plots and dramas that we act out, as well as about the themes that we want to invest energy in, and those that we want to withdraw the energy from. I believe all of you know that my background before was in engineering, and I was running an engineering construction company. And when I was given the task of running the geotechnical division, my first thought was to create people who are like me, who can carry on the work of soil improvement. Unlike Naren was able to do that successfully, to create that second layer of people. But to me, I failed miserably because I just could not inspire my engineers to really learn about soil mechanics, about soil improvement. And at that time, I did not have the skill of coaching. And I did not know about this narrative conversation, because one of the engineers that I wanted to entrust all the knowledge that I have so that he can become an expert like I was. When I think back, I realized the narrative that he kept running in his mind. And the narrative was, whenever I wanted to coach him, wanted to train him in deeper and deeper into soil mechanics, his narrative was, Naren, I wonder if you come across this kind. His narrative was, Mr. Mazuki, you studied in England before, that's why you can learn all of this. I'm just a local grad, so I cannot, it's difficult for me to learn this. I didn't know at that time when I was restudying this narrative conversation that it hit me. No wonder he couldn't move further from there, because he had that narrative, and that narrative prevented him from becoming an expert in soil improvement. And there's nothing wrong with him. I could see that he had a lot of potential. After I left the company, many years after that, maybe a decade after that, he started off his own construction company and all that, and he did very well. However, in the context of specialization, in the context of soil improvement, because of that narrative, that prevented him from truly learning the specialization that he needed to do. So when I look at this narrative conversation, this is why we want to have this conversation. Okay? So third point over here is that narrative gives us the ability to succinctly summarize the times of our life. How do we do this? We narrate our story as we present our script, a plot, and or a theme. In this way, the narrative encodes our life in a particular linguistic form, a story. I emphasize the words particular linguistic form because story and narrative hardly seem like linguistics. They are just, well, stories. Yet stories are made up of stuff, of our own PR, myths, gossips, hopes, fantasies, fears. So that was the stuff that was running his narrative. I graduated locally. That's why I'm not a good enough engineer. And that story became alive for him. The stories become alive for a person, and it becomes a psychological description for that particular person. With entrapment, narrative sets up meta-level belief frames that can keep us in distress or pleasure, can expand or limit our choices, can label or define who we are, and set a plot that either imprison or frees. And stories are powerful in wonderful ways, in many ways. On one hand, they can be extremely succinct. Someone can come up to you and you ask the person, if you could summarize your life, what would it be? The person can summarize it with the word bum. It can be that succinct, and it can be a few sentences, like what I shared with you about a friend, my friend in geotechnics before. So the thing about it is, the more succinct the story, the narrative that you create about the story, the more entrenched you become, the more the word is entrapped you become in your own story. So as you can imagine, it has lots of examples that you can look from in your life about this. The thing about it is that you want to be very careful about the stories that you create in your own life. Using a single word or such short phrases to generalize the meaning of the times of our lives and create a very limited map. What these examples that I gave to you earlier, what my friend needed was a new narrative, a new story to lead a new way to do life. Yet we often get stuck because we literally do not know of anything else that we could possibly say about our experiences than what we have said. So with that, we create multitudes of ugly and hurtful meanings encoded in a story, and that can imprison us in a matrix. Yeah. So let me just pause there for a moment, because I've been talking for about 15 minutes now, and let me invite any feedback that you want to bring, any questions that you have. And I'd like to say welcome to Hashim, who's just joined us. Thank you for joining us, Hashim. Pleasure to see you. So just on those first 5 points regarding the theoretical framework, just checking with you, are there any questions that you may have or something that struck your mind? So go ahead, unmute yourself. Naren, if you want to say something, unmute yourself first.
You want me to start? Let others start. I can think of a lot of things.
Okay.
Partly from my engineering career, and also partly, as you all know now, when I retired, I teach yoga, but I also give workshops on stress management.
Okay.
Yeah, stress and leadership, but using yoga practices. It's very much same. NLP, all are same.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things was, this last weekend, I was invited for a youth leadership workshop, mostly youth of mixed kinds. I would say predominantly Hindu youth, right? And if I may use the word idiot, one idiot who is supposedly a psychologist brought up the issue growing up as a Indian in Perth. And she narrated, oh, when I went to school, there was only 3 Indians in 800 people of whites. And, you know, it's difficult. And she's a psychologist as well.
Okay.
Young one. And there are a lot of students who are in high school. And so I was listening as a speaker, but because she's a psychologist, I have to give her the face and let her finish. So I told her, now let's forget being an Indian among whites. Just change your whole thing, because I should have listened to your coaching series before. I said, just go back to Belfast, where my younger brother lives, and exchange this. Growing up as a Catholic in a school full of Protestants.
Oh.
Right? Then I said, go to India, where most of you come from. Growing up as a low caste in a school full of high caste. Right? Indians are very, right? And I said, I even mentioned Malaysia, because I said, Malaysia, growing up in a place where there is, in a school where you're very few non-Malays versus Malays. And people say discriminated. So I told them, it is not about being Indian in a white thing. It's about what we carry in our head.
Yes.
And what we see. What we see, right? There is, if somebody is bullying you because you're Indian and he's white, it is not a black and white thing. It is a mental defect on the other side, not on your side.
Yeah.
You must see the other side as having a mental defect. Right, my younger brother, who is like me, but younger fellow, GP, he's a GP in near Belfast. He's the commissioner for equal rights in Belfast. Equal rights between Catholics and Protestants, because Catholics complain the Protestants in Northern Ireland always discriminate them in the government service. So they had to find somebody who is not a Catholic and who is not a Protestant. They found him. Because very few Indians or Sri Lankans or Hindus or non-Christian live in Belfast. So they found him and they made him the commissioner. So he tells me all the stories about how, so it's all coming from here.
Yes.
I told them, if I thought that I am a non-Malay, I would never have done business in Malaysia. I will say, yeah, I am a non-Malay, I cannot do business in Malaysia. Right? I am a non-white in Perth, I can never start a business in Perth.
Yes. I
have to be somebody's slave. So I said, it's all what you carry and not what other people do. Other people will always do something, but you worry about what you carry in the head.
Yeah. So
that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you, Nari. And the fact that being Sri Lankan, living all over, I was about to say all over the world, but you live in Singapore and then Perth, and then starting a business in Malaysia, which is that business concern is still ongoing, and you left, meaning that you had a useful or fruitful narrative about yourself, because that narrative of non-Malays will find it difficult to do business in Malaysia. I believe quite a lot of people have that kind of narrative, yeah, because of the constraints. However, this is why I mentioned earlier, when we have the healthy narrative, healthy story about ourselves, it is not about what's out there. It's the story that we are telling. So thank you very much for sharing that. Yeah. And I'd like to welcome Franska, who's just joined us. And Franska mentioned that she can put on her video or talk because she's putting her daughter to sleep. She's just on audio. So welcome, Franska. So those are a couple of points regarding the theoretical framework behind this narrative conversation. So I'd like to add a few more points being the theoretical framework to this narrative conversation. Next point over here is that we human beings use language, and our use of language can create boxes that limit us or free us from such boxes. So the magic of language is that when we use language that limits, it limits our ability. When we use language that frees us, then we are able to move further. Now, White and Epson in 1990 talked about the magic of language in the book, The Narrative Means to Therapeutic Ends. They presented a model called narrative therapy. It is based on most of the same premises as that which governs coaching. The client has the resources and is the expert of his or her own life. The coach facilitates the process for the client's own self-management. So that is why in coaching, the skill of listening, the skill of listening refers to our hearing the language that the client is using. And from there, we can detect the languages that they are using. Are they limiting them, or are they freeing them? So this is why language is very important, right? Next point I'd like to bring here is that sometimes the problem is just that we are referring to the language itself. We are living in and continually rehearsing a story that interferes with releasing our potentials. So the question that I would like to invite you to ask yourself, do you have any stories like that? Do you have any stories that you tell yourself or others that undermine your resourcefulness? So some people, they have this narrative about all of their life. And because of that, they determine the rest of their lives based on those stories. Sometimes we have stories related to certain aspect of their lives. And because of that, those stories will impact that particular aspect of their life. So when we look at these stories, what we are looking at is that the problem, as what we have discussed earlier, is not what's out there. It is the stories, the narrative itself is the problem. It is the retelling, because stories are very, the word is very compelling. When we create stories, we create hero stories, we create victim stories. So when we retell the story and relive that story, then it becomes our template for the future, even though that story has outlived its usefulness. So it may not be useful now, but because we keep retelling it, we are telling ourselves for the future, this is what's going to happen in our life. I had this story. Thank goodness I managed to get to rid myself of that story quite many years ago. But the story that I had about myself is that I'm a martyr, meaning to say my life is to serve others at the expense of my own happiness. So I would do things specifically for others, even though I don't like it, but I would just force myself to do it because why not? I'm the martyr. So it's an either or kind of situation. Either I serve others or I be happy. So because I'm a martyr, I must serve others despite my unhappiness. And for many years, I was living life that way until I managed to change that story. So now I'm able to serve others and be happy at the same time. Those of you who know me, you know my love for coffee. And I've come, and I know that my coffee intake is limited. My body size, I cannot take too much coffee, so I limit myself to the amount of coffee that I take. However, now I've managed to shift it to the point whereby I don't just derive pleasure in drinking that cup of coffee every day. I've now derived pleasure in making coffee for others. And through that, I learn to serve others and be happy at the same time. So every morning after I have my cup of coffee, I will make that cup of coffee for my wife before I leave home. And making that cup of coffee gives me great pleasure, because now I've got rid of that old story of I'm the martyr, I'm here to serve others, and I must be unhappy. So in de-storying, when we take that story and we tear it apart, we invite a person to stop telling him or herself that the story blinds him or her to possibilities and potentials, because the narrative creates a framework whereby they cannot see their possibilities and potentials out there. We may even question it enough to start pulling it apart. So this is where the skill of questioning as a coach comes in, because we cannot tell people about their stories, because stories, narratives are beliefs, and they are strengthened by belief systems that a person has created. You cannot tear apart a person's belief system, because as you give information, it will only enhance that belief system, even though that belief system that they have, the system that I'm only a local graduate, I cannot learn all of this, even though that belief system is hurting them, we cannot influence a person against their belief system. But this is where questions come in, to get them to question their pre-existing belief system, and it is through the questions they will tear that old story apart. In that way, we can allure them to re-story themselves with another plot and theme. And hopefully the plot and theme that we bring to them are plots and themes that are empowering them. So questions, for example, what are the example questions that we can ask them? In the next section, I'm going to go into more detailed questions, but these are examples of questions that we can ask people that creates that questioning mind for themselves to question their narratives. Asking the question, when a person relates to us the story, ask the question, so how about you? Do you see yourself in that story? Do you like your story? Who storied you regarding this? How empowering is the story? Does it bring out your best? Would you like to de-story or re-story yourself? What are the themes and plots that make up the story? What dramas are implied within the story? What events have been used to build upon the story? What stories work well and what stories undermine living with compassion. So these are some examples that we can offer to someone, so that through these questions, they begin to, I'll use the word, quality control their pre-existing narrative, the pre-existing stories, because by doing that, it will just shake that foundation. Because in order for us to help a person to create a new story, we need to deframe the old story first. And we cannot deframe it by telling. We can only deframe it through inviting the person to ask themselves how useful or harmful the stories that they have been using in their lives. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and invite questions. Anyone has got any questions or comments or thinking out loud that you would like? So go ahead. So these are the theoretical framework behind the narrative conversation.
Masuki,
Yes.
based on the list of questions, right, that you just now you mentioned, how it can narrative question related with hypnosis, or is two different things?
Thank you for asking that question. The word that I will use is that when we are asking questions, we ask questions from the position of rapport. Remember that, Guat-Ching? So it's about listening and rapport, being in rapport. Part of when you are in rapport, there is a certain amount of trance involved when you are in rapport with someone. So when you say, is it part of hypnosis? Trance is part of hypnosis. Yeah. So we talk about trance being when your mind is being taken up by something that takes your attention away from what's out here. So that is basically a trance. You have moved from your conscious awareness moves from the physical reality into your internal reality. So that's basically trance. So in a conversation that is that comes from caring and compassion, the person is in full rapport. The moment you ask those questions, then you are in fact sending that person's awareness into trance. So that's why rapport is key. Without rapport, and the person doesn't, the person's conscious awareness doesn't go to that question. The person's conscious awareness will remain here, and the person will not be processing that information. Yeah. So yes, I would answer it with a yes. Yes is part of hypnosis, is part of trance, because at the very moment we are in rapport, for example, I mentioned to you about Naren, and whenever that I and Naren, we sit down and discuss about neurosemantics, sorry, when we discuss about soul improvement, everything else goes away, right, Naren? So we are there in trance.
And even in hypnosis, there's even one level further, regression, where they take them back, and actually it works too. Take them back to the previous life and lives, and they try to find out where is the story coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For some people, if they are running the meta program of epistemology, or the epistemology meta program, they are running it on the why. So this is the why spectrum. The spectrum is why, and on this end of the spectrum is what. For people who are running on the why spectrum, they find difficulty in handling the current scenario, yeah, the what, if they don't know the why. Yeah. People who are running the meta program epistemology on what, as long as they know what's the problem and how to solve it, they will do in order to solve it. But some people, they just need to know the why before they can move to the what and then how. Some people, they just are stuck there. Yeah, and trauma that happen for a person, especially when they are young, or trauma that are you can say huge trauma that a person experiences, by default, the unconscious mind will create a memory loss for that, because part of the directive of the unconscious mind is that when a person cannot handle the emotion that they're experiencing at that point, what the unconscious mind will do is they will block even the memory of the event, so that the person will continue to survive, because the prime directive of the unconscious mind is to keep this person alive. So if the unconscious mind detects that the trauma, the hurt, is going to cause further harm to the master, it will block the memory of what happened to let this person to continue to live. So under those situations, then using hypnosis regression will allow the person to access back the memory. Yeah, and that is why part of hypnosis, I would say not say part of hypnosis, how you can get hypnosis to work is to put the person under a state of safety. When the person feels safe, they will be willing to allow their mind to move or to regress to whatever memory that needs to be brought to the here and now. So for people who are fixated on the why, yes, you can use hypnosis in order to get the person to be understanding that why. However, with the people who are running the meta program of what and how, they are not so bothered about why it happened. They just want to solve it here and now. They can proceed without knowing that. Yeah.
One thing.
Yes.
Some people seem, their mind seems to, unconscious mind seems to block the trauma. They keep on regurgitating it and saying, blaming all their problem in life on the either getting beaten by the father or something else. So is everybody's unconscious mind blocking it? Only some people's unconscious mind is capable of blocking it?
To a large extent, each and every one of us, when we go through certain experiences, we create a narrative about what happened. We create a story. Yeah. So in the context of people experiencing a large trauma, what happens is that if the trauma is strong enough, the unconscious mind will block the memory of what happened in order to reduce the trauma. However, that trauma itself will have triggered a narrative about what happened. So that's why Naren, when you say that the person is running that program, yeah, they are running that narrative. They are running a story. They're using a story to run their lives. It's just that they do not have recollection of the actual events that created the story. So they had some idea of something happened. They can't remember what happened, but a story has been created. So the thing about it is that, is the story useful, or is the story limiting? So that is what we are talking about this evening. So that is why the narrative conversation is so critical for us to understand, because we remember things best through stories. Okay. Hashim, anything that you would like to comment for now, before we move on to the next point? So let's move on to the next point because Hashim is still muted. That's okay. So moving on to the next point, I'm going to go into the questions that we can use in order to re-narrate the story. Now, before I go into these questions, instead of my listing down each of those questions, and it may not be so useful to us if we don't remember all of those, I would like to invite you to engage yourself in this particular subtopic emotionally, in the sense that to be with what we are discussing in a short while. So before I bring up the questions for re-narrating your story, I would like to invite you to be thinking about, so let me just share screen over here. Yeah, I'd like to invite you to think about a specific aspect of your life. So it could be the personal aspect, family aspect, finance aspect, health aspect, social aspect, or career aspect, whichever. Just find one particular aspect of your life and then go to a particular part of that particular aspect of your life and notice a narrative that you may have had about a particular experience. For example, we've been in lockdown coming to 2 years already with COVID-19. Okay, and I use the analogy that COVID is like a storm, and we are all in boats at sea. Yeah. Some people, their boats are huge, cruise liners. So even though the sea is rough, they don't really feel it. Okay? But some people, they are in rowboats, one-person rowboat. So every movement of the sea, they can feel it. Yeah. So probably in the last 2 years, some of us would have experienced some form of emotional trauma because of this. Yeah. So that's what I'm referring to. So look at your life from one particular aspect and then find an incident or a segment of your life in that particular aspect that may have created, I'll use the word negative narrative for you, that may have created a sense of limit, a sense of disempowerment in you, because I want you to use that as an example when I go through the 4 different types of questions in a short while. Because when I give you those questions and you apply those questions to that particular narrative that you have in your life, then you will feel the effect of the questions. Yeah. Say, for example, during the whole COVID situation in the last 24 months, that your business is completely demolished and you are totally out of pocket. So the narrative is that my business is totally gone and I'm out of pocket. So if that is the narrative that you're running, then just hold on to that, because when I come in with these questions, I'm going to invite you to go through these questions. So when I come in with these questions, then you'll notice how it feels. Yeah? You'll notice how it feels to have these questions to re-narrate your story. Okay? So, have you got that? So I hope that each and every one of you are holding one particular narrative in your mind about a specific incident in a specific aspect of your life. So just hold that, and then we are going to go through the questions for re-narrating your story. So let's begin with the questions. So the first category of question is what we call the discovery question. So use this question for your particular narrative. So discovery question, an example here is that, what story have you lived in up until now? So the example that I gave just now is that, oh, the COVID has demolished my business and I'm totally out of pocket because of this. Yeah. Next question that you can ask, and these questions not in any particular order, you need to check whether it's relevant to you or not. Who storied you with that narrative account? So where do you get that story from? Were you influenced by certain things around you that created that narrative? Another question that you can ask is that story part of your cultural story, racial story, religious story, family story? So culture, race, religion, it is a kind of environment around us. So that environment may contribute to the narrative that you have. So these are the discovery questions. So when you are looking at any narrative that you have, whatever that you're holding in your mind, to ask yourself these questions, because now it allows you to re-evaluate that narrative, to shake it, to know where it comes from. Okay, so that's the first category of question. The next phase of question, category of phase, are the quality control questions. The quality control question is, as you step back from the story and evaluate its usefulness, productivity, value, emotional enjoyment, what comes to mind? Another one would be, would you recommend living in that story to anyone else? How well has this narrative served you? So if I were to go back to the example that I used, that COVID has demolished my business and left me totally out of pocket. So if I were to step back and ask myself, is usefulness not useful at all to me? That story is not useful at all, because it creates that sense of disempowerment. I feel the energy just goes out of my body. So would I recommend living in that story to anyone else? No, I do not want to recommend that story to you, or even to anyone that I don't know. I don't want to recommend that story. Yeah. And how well has this narrative served me? It hasn't served me at all. Okay. It just creates a self-pity. Oh no. So by asking these questions, then you begin to quality control a particular narrative. So as you apply these questions on that particular narrative that you have for yourself, so what answers do you give to yourself? So the next level of questions, from quality controlling, now we are moving to the next step, questions for inventing a new story. What do we ask? Just for the fun of it, what if you were to make up a wild and woolly story? Pretend if you cannot fail. What if you cannot fail? Can you create a wild story? what positive and bright sparkling moments have you experienced that has not fit into your dominant story? Another question is, what would be an outcome completely at odds with your current problem-saturated story? Because now what we are looking at is that any belief that we have, and the beliefs are the ones that are holding the old narrative in place, we have created evidences to those beliefs. But asking this question, the question of what positive and bright sparkling moments have you experienced that does not fit into your dominant story. So these are exceptions to your story. So now when you bring in the exceptions to your story, then the story will lose its power, will lose its strength. Because now you can see the exceptions. Prior to this, you are only seeing the truth of the narrative of the story. So if you were to ask these questions about your particular narrative, so how are you answering them? So in the example that I gave to you, the narrative that I gave to you about COVID in these 24 months, when I ask these questions, I can come up with multiple examples about how I am contributing to myself, to the people around me, from the small things to the bigger things. I can see that, no, it didn't diminish me. It didn't diminish me. So now that whole story is not something that I believe anymore. So these are the questions for inventing a new story. So moving on to the fourth step, the fourth and final step, questions for restoring your life and career. So now that the old story has lost its luster, has lost its compellingness, so begin asking the question, as you continue to use your imagination, what is it like when you fully and completely step into the new restored version and experience it fully in all of the sensory systems? How can you enrich this new story with even more details so that it becomes more vivid to you? What audiences can you find to perform this story before? So going back to the example that I brought earlier, so if when I go into my imagination, throwing away that story that my business is completely demolished, and then now I can't remember what it was anymore. Okay, so now I'm beginning to see, wow, during this COVID period, there are so many people who have latched onto creative ideas, and from those creative ideas, they are just creating such wonderful lives for themselves. And I'm allowing myself to be inspired by those. And most recently, I think yesterday, it was announced that Grab just bought over Jaya Grocer. And Jaya Grocer is a big organization. They've been established for a long time. However, because of the COVID situation, Grab Food and all this operating, they've grown so big that they were able to buy Jaya Grocer. And I go, wow, in this scenario, instead of thinking about the business that may have been lost, I want to go into thinking about what kind of new areas of business that I can be creative about, that I can create from there. And I'm beginning to look into things that I have not looked before. Before I've been dismissing them as not useful. Now I'm just taking them up and just re-examining it. Yeah? Things like people are investing into cryptocurrencies now. So I'm looking into cryptocurrencies. Okay, previously I was dismissing it. So now I'm looking at it. okay, there are investors who are going in cryptocurrencies and now coming in with NFTs, non-fungible tokens. I say, oh, those are interesting ideas. So I'm opening up my creative ideas to all of these things happening. And who are the audiences that I want to perform this story to? That will be me first. I need to perform the story to me, and then to the people around me. So for you as well, when you look at your old story, so what is this new story, and how will you be performing these stories? So these are the 4-step questions that you can come up with that will first allow you to re-examine the old narrative, and then from re-examining it, now we quality control, and from that quality controlling, we are moving into the creativity part of inventing a new story, and then finally to re-story your life and career. So these are the 4-step process in the narrative conversation that will allow us to create more empowering stories in our lives. Okay, good. So I'd like to almost end there. We are coming to the end of the session. So with respect to the restoring part, any questions or comments or ideas that come to mind? I'd like to invite any one of you. So go ahead.
To me, I mean, when you show the things, I would think of health.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's a thing of myself, because I'm fat kind of things. So, and also I have been this size for more than 49 years. And of course, last time I used to have, it's very hard for me to slim down.
Okay.
Because it's maybe genetic problem, because my father, my mother's all are fat, big size. So that's why I also, of course, that's the natural way of I'm fat kind of things, you see. And that's why I cannot slim down. Yeah, so it's impossible for me to slim down. You see, so that is why, and of course, but during the COVID, actually, during this COVID, actually, I slimmed down. A lot of people gain weight during the lockdown, but I slimmed down during the lockdown.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then I have my so-called the lowest weight in the past 20 years. Yeah, during the January, but now bounce back a bit kind of things. Yeah, and of course, then suddenly in about September, when the government just, I think it's September, they opened the borders where we can cross border, all this kind of things, right? That made me start my exercise, just like walking kind of thing, you see. Some people, they want to walk 10,000 steps per day. But I make it as, of course, I'm not able to walk 10,000 steps per day. So actually, I start with the plan. At least Saturday and Sunday, I walk 10,000 meters per day, not 10,000 steps. To so-called, so that's why now I've come to the I really have this kind of a weekly routine where Saturday and Sunday I walk 10,000 meters and actually bring down some weight.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is the thing where actually it's still possible to slim down, not really impossible, although I have been this size for the plus size for 40 over years, but at the end of the day, that's why now I have a challenge. Put a challenge to myself. By the 31st of December, I want to be lighter than my son.
Okay. So what's the new story?
The new story is I want to be more healthy, and also because I found that during this COVID kind of thing, these 2 weeks, these 2 years I locked down at home kind of thing, right? I would say my mobility, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say mobility. I mean, I found that my balancing is like not that good as before kind of thing. Because I feel that is also my worries. I don't know whether that is a symptom of anything kind of things to be happen to me kind of things. So that's why I try to so-called to be more healthy kind of thing and try to, gain back the physical mobility, all this kind of thing. Because I found that because I used to able to tie the shoelace on one foot. When I wear my shoe, I able to tie my shoelace on one foot. But after the COVID, right, maybe in the middle of last year, suddenly I found that I cannot do this anymore kind of things, you see. That is an alarm to myself, which I become like more disabled than before kind of thing. So that's why I try to be more healthy kind of things. And also because of my size, I'm worried what if one day, right, I really collapse at home, my wife and my son cannot carry me. So that's why I want to make a new me, which is, more mobility and also more lightweight.
Okay.
Kind of thing. So at least if anything happens, people are still able to help me, can carry me up to the car and send me to the hospital kind of things. You see, more mobile. Yeah, that is my new story. Good. I don't know whether it's relevant to this or not.
Yeah, because the old story of it is hereditary and all that was preventing you from even exercising. So somehow along the way you stopped having that story that gave you the power to exercise. So that's the difference in your outer game when you change the story that is in the inner game. So congratulations to you for doing that. Thank you. Yes, anyone else has got anything to share with respect to the questions regarding restoring our narratives?
In terms of, you see, when I retired 1st January 2019, I was going to take DC. I like to teach yoga in my in the room opposite here. I just do this and be happy. Then when the COVID came, all that had to stop. Then I discovered there is such a thing called Zoom because people were asking for the class. Then I realized, hey, this is interesting because I am not very IT, I'm very gundu in IT. This means I can connect with a lot of people. And while I was actually going to be retiring and teaching 2-3 classes, 4 classes a week and doing gardening, look after my wife, now I found I can reach the whole world. Then I actually found now I have an outlet to not my engineering knowledge, my yoga and Ayurveda knowledge, like what was right? Talk about all these issues I studied purely for my personal fitness, because in my family, my father's side have diabetes, my mother's side have rheumatoid arthritis and big size.
Okay.
All my siblings, my elder brother is the Brunei Sultan's plastic surgeon. His family plus everything, but he's on wheelchair. My younger brother, who is in Belfast, is on wheelchair. My sister is on wheelchair. Their narrative is hereditary, we cannot do anything, just take medicine. But mine was, no, I can change it. So I was also fat when I was young, but I started playing rugby, running, reduce my eating. And now I learned even more deeper. Like if I take Co's example, Co, you must think, what makes me always eat, right? I'm not saying cut your food down. Think carefully, what makes me eat, you'll find the answer. Then comes the exercise. That means what I'm saying is, change the relationship between your mind and the food.
Yeah.
If we start, so I just digress a bit. So now I am learning. Now I have come back into the workforce as a health coach using yoga practice and Ayurveda, but I had to learn how to even plan online courses. Then I have to learn about online platforms, how to reach out to people, and I'm enjoying it. Completely different to engineering, but I'm bringing on engineering into this. To me, the human machine is the most interesting machine.
Yep.
I studied from Western medicine point of view, from a Ayurveda point of view, from an Eastern philosophy point of view, everything, and then I combine it. And now I'm about to launch. And now I'm working harder than I was working before retirement.
Actually, you bring the point, you see, eating, you see, what I eat now, because when during COVID time, when I cut down my diet kind of thing, I eat less kind of thing, right? My wife sort of like questioned me, what's wrong with you? My cooking not good or whatsoever, all this kind of thing, is it? And then no, I just want to be more, I want to lose weight lah. Then suddenly she asked me, why you want to lose weight? For what? Something like I got someone eat outside kind of things, you see. Well, so
my sister in London on wheelchair also tell my wife, why your husband always try to keep fit? Does he want to marry again?
that's my problem also, you see. So when I cut down, so my wife had this problem. So actually we have argument until quarreling kind of thing, which at the end of the day worth the quarrel. At least I'm able to cut down my eating kind of thing, so I can eat less at least. So I mean, so and then also, right, when I cut down my food, all my first is my wife, and then my relative, those who know me, you eat so little, you fool lah. I say, yeah. You sure you don't want to add kind of things, you don't want to tambah nasi, yeah, those kind of. That's why when I try to cut down my food, now all the people around me, those who know me, is like, are you sure not enough? Are you kind of things, you see? So that is another challenge which I have to really not only convince me, is that to convince them actually all this kind of thing. That's why it's not only my narratives restrict me, it's the whole environment restrict me from eating less. That is the problem. I want to go to gym. My wife say, why suddenly you want to go to gym? Who you going with? Girl. Okay, don't go lah. Forget about the gym.
And this is a very interesting point, right, Cᴏ. When you put in, so the narrative that you have needs to be stronger than the narratives that people have around you.
That's right.
So probably you need to come up with the narrative. No lah, I'm eating less so that I can save money and then bring my wife for holiday.
But now bring her to holiday is another so-called nonsense. She said, now COVID, where can I go? You see, that's another problem. Yeah. So that is why now, whenever, that's why I choose walking, because why? Because with all the apps available in the app stores, right? Every Saturday and Sunday and all those public holiday where I don't need to work and I can go for a morning walk for 10,000 meters, right? I actually using 3 apps to track my walking and show to her and publish on Facebook. I'm really walking. Yeah, kind of things. From what time to what time, kind of thing, and how far I have walked, kind of things. Yeah. That thing.
Okay. Thank you for that, Cᴏ. Wow. Yeah. So those are all about narratives. You need to have the right narrative, and sometimes this is where critical thinking comes in. When you bring on new narratives, you need to also check the ecology of the new narrative. Cik, when you mentioned about eating,
Yeah.
I know my body size. I cannot eat a full portion that most people eat. I remember when I visited Naren in Perth. Naren, you introduced me to into Tağ masala. First time I ate Tağ masala, it was in Perth. All this while I've been eating Tağ here. I didn't know about Tağ masala. Big portion. So I remember I couldn't finish it. So even now, whenever I go, let's say I go for this nasi campur or whatsoever, I ordered like today I had nasi belauk, and automatically I will say half rice. The rice just half portion. And typically, the person who's selling the rice look at me and say, "Why you eat so little? Why you eat so little?" And
that's my problem.
For some time, I have been using a certain story, and this story was not ecological. I stopped using this story. I use the story, I'm already old, I cannot eat so much. But when I use that story, I begin to believe that I'm old. And I begin to walk slowly, and I said, "No, wrong story to use." Wrong story to use. So this is where, when we use stories in our lives, we want to make sure that it is healthy ecologically. It doesn't also cause some misalignment somewhere. So I stopped using that story. So when they ask why only half rice, I say half is enough for me. Okay, so
because I also keep telling me, you see, myself, now aging already, getting so-called older, so I should not eat so much kind of things, you see. But at the end of the day, as what you say, so I say, people ask why you want, because I always add rice one man. Now I not adding rice, just eat a normal portion. So even though the auntie selling rice, so you don't want to add rice, I say don't want. Why? Save money.
Okay, thank you, Cik Siu. So coming to almost the end of the session, what I would like to do is, before I wrap up the whole session, just like to invite comments from each and every one of you, your feedback about the whole session that we have for today. So I would like to start off with Hashim. Are you able to unmute yourself and let us hear some comments before we end? No? Okay, thank you, Hashim. And Franska, thank you for being here. I know that you cannot unmute yourself, otherwise your daughter will wake up. However, it's a pleasure that you are here with us this evening. Next, Naren, anything that you like to say before we end? Your mic, please.
Sorry, I said it was very educational and also very practical. We can actually use it in any setting. It's very secular. It's not aligned to any particular religious thought, but there's a lot of spirituality inside this, but it's packaged in a very secular way. Really good, really good. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Naren. And Guat Cheng, anything that you like to say before we end? You need to unmute yourself first.
The narrative question is very useful to do a self-reflection, to look back how you spent in 2020 and 2021, and also you can easily to detect what kind of meta program or metrics you are playing in your mind.
Wow. Thank you, Guat Cheng. And last but not least, Cᴏ, anything that you like to say?
Yeah, for the narrative, I mean, that means the story kind of things, right? I mean, I found that this 4 questions is very useful. I mean, first thing for self-reflection, and also it's good to so-called use in goal setting, New Year resolution. This thing just, to me, is just can't at the right time where actually now at the end of the year already, this is also, I can use this 4 questions to set my New Year resolution. And also I found that it's very good or useful in doing training. Because like someone, they don't know something until you train them to know something. These are the 4 questions you can we can so-called guide or coach them kind of thing in along the way kind of thing to make them feel that, make them confident. Because see, due to my own personal experience, right? Because I trained a lot of those kind of fresh grad in doing education counseling. They always not confident enough because I'm just a 24, 23 years old, and you ask me to go and counsel people on a master program kind of thing, you see, MBA. Wow. So these are the things I think is very good for me to use these 4 questions to so-called coach them to become more confident kind of things.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Cᴏ. And Hashim, are you able to unmute yourself? Because I noticed you just re-log in. So, okay, so still not able to do that. Never mind. So what I'll do is just to wrap up, I'd like to summarize by saying that narrative as a model and metaphor offers us another way to look at, talk about, and deal with our experiences. What if we viewed our life as a story? If we did, what kind of story is your life? What is its plot, its nature? Are you living a drama, a melodrama, a comedy, tragedy, horror, detective, hero journey? So what kind of plot are you thinking about your life? The narrative approach enables us to ask many empowering coaching questions. The first question is, who storied you? Do you like the story? Does it serve to enhance your life and empower you as a person? Would you like a new story? If so, what story would you like to have narrated? A narrative conversation enables us to playfully talk about life in some new and surprising ways, enabling us to facilitate transformation. Probably before closing, I just want to mention about how a person changed his life. This is the story of Alfred Nobel. The story of Alfred Nobel. Somehow there was a miscommunication. He was somebody also by the name of Nobel, probably his relative or what. Sorry, Hashim?
Yeah. Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, okay.
Yes.
I am listening well, but I'm driving in the car now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's why I was muted, and then I was actually listening to the keywords, the story of our life. So very interesting. So I hope I see you again next week. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Hashim. Thank you for letting me know that. So that was a little bit of wonder that I had when you cannot mention that. So going back to the story I was relating. So there was a mistaken identity. People thought that Alfred Nobel was the one who died, and they put up this story about who he was. And when he read the obituary, he was stunned, because Alfred Nobel was the founder of dynamite. And from dynamite, people created bombs, weapons of mass destruction. So the obituary was, here is a man who created death, who brought death to hundreds and thousands of people. That's the gist of the story. So when he read that story, he said, no, I don't want this story about my life. So what he did was he began to work towards the creation of a new story. He said, I do not want people to have this story about my life. So that's when he devoted his life into peace. He devoted whatever wealth that he got from the creation of dynamite into all the peace processes, to the extent that today, when we talk about Nobel, we remember the Nobel Peace Prize. So what he did was he changed his story. And so can we in that respect. Yeah. So with that, I would like to thank all of you for being here this evening. Thank you to Cᴏ Guat-Ching and Franska listening in the quiet of the room, and Hashim, you are driving today, and also Naren. It's a pleasure seeing you again, more than 2 years since we last met. So glad to see you again. So everyone, I hope to see you again. If you are able to join me for the parenting session next week, we can meet next week. Otherwise, the coaching one for next year, January, for the coaching series, I'll be starting on the Meta Coach system. So that's what we'll be covering in the coaching series. So with that, everyone, thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again. May God bless you in whatever it is that you do. May you have good times coming to you, good in terms of how you define them to be good. So with that, thank you and good night, everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Basuki.